I think one of the differences in shopping for one is that you have to be much more conscious of if you're buying fresh foods, how long they're going to last. So one of the advantages of shopping a farmer's market or getting CSA shares is that the foods are really fresh. So the likelihood that they're going to last longer is greater than if you're buying it someplace where maybe it's been sitting around for a little while, because usually the farmer picks it like the day that they come to the market. So that's really great. You also want to think about, are you interested in buying food just to eat it fresh for now, or interested in buying some food that you can preserve in some way, whether it's in the freezer or canning it, drying it for later. Sometimes if you choose to buy a large bulk of one item and you're going to preserve it for later, you might get a reduced price on that. So that could be a wise choice if you're actually going to do that. I know lots of people who end up opening up the vegetable drawer and finding mostly food that's gone bad and feeling very disappointed about that wonderful fresh food that went bad. So you really have to be thinking a little bit ahead about your preferences and what you're going to do with that.
What are some things that people should keep in mind if they are thinking about preserving some of the food that they're going to get?
One thing people want to think about, what kind of storage you have at home. If you have a freezer, do you have space in your freezer, or is it pretty jammed up because you don't want to buy stuff that you can't preserve? Sometimes people think about certain foods that are easy to freeze without having to do anything with it before you put it in the freezer. You know, maybe like blueberries, you can just freeze them fresh as they are. But there are lots of vegetables that can, with a very light blanching in hot water for just a few minutes, can then be nicely frozen, preserved. You can't just freeze them raw, but you can freeze them once they've been blanched. And so when you're at the market, you can think about that in terms of broccoli and carrots and green beans and any number of foods that you don't have to be a canner to preserve, but you can also preserve in the freezer.
And then we got the traditional beefsteaks there. Okay. And if you want to try Sunkist.
There are a number of reasons to buy in season. One is cost. It can be the time that you can get that particular product at a better price. One is taste. It can be much more flavorful because it hasn't been in storage for a long time and maybe it hasn't been shipped from someplace else in the world. So buying in season meaning especially buying products that are in season in your community. So taste, cost, and health are all good reasons to buy local and buy in season. Sometimes when we're thinking about if you're on a tight income, you may be used to developing a pretty strict list of the things that you're going to buy at the store to keep your costs down, and you've been trained perhaps to really stick to that list. And while that can be a technique for keeping costs down, it may make you feel a little constrained and not be kind of looking around and saying, well, what really looks good to me today? What looks fresh? And maybe there's tastes, you know, you can actually have a taste of something in the market, what tastes really good and inspires you to want to buy it. And I think it's good to be able to a certain extent with fresh produce that we know is healthy to follow that instinct a little bit and consider, well, how can you get home and then get creative with it and actually use it and not leave it in the vegetable drawer. So I would say it's good to make a list, but also diverge from that a little bit if you are inspired.
What are some ways that people could maybe use vegetables that they don't always think about?
Well, lots of times when we think about vegetables, I think people commonly think of dinner or maybe salad for lunch, and they think of things that they have to cook extensively or they have to have a recipe for. So one thing that I encourage people to think about is that so much fresh produce, if it's really good quality and it's fresh, you don't need to do anything with it. Basically, I mean, you could eat it raw if you can, or you can just lightly steam it or blanch it, or just do a very light stir fry with hardly any additional spicing, because it just has its own natural flavor and taste, and it's so good. And when you think about having a meal, you know, having a few very simple things that come together on the plate, it's amazing how nicely some vegetables that are simply prepared with some fresh cold fruit, you know, some cottage cheese and toast can even be a wonderful meal that has a complement of all the things that you need, and you can enjoy because you look at it, it looks pretty, it's healthful, it doesn't have to be fancy and take hours to cook.